This meeting will come to order. I want to thank everybody for coming in today for the study session on Tuesday, January 10th, 2017. I think we have a pretty important topic to discuss today, and I'll be allowing public input. I'd like you to, if you do come up and speak, that you keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. I'd appreciate that, so we can give an opportunity for everybody to speak that wants to speak. And I know there's going to be quite a bit of discussion from up here on the dais also. So, roll call, please.
Mayor Oberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson.
Here.
Councilman Blair.
Here.
Councilman Lozelle.
Here.
Councilwoman Orr.
Here.
Councilman Shiska.
Here.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Here.
All present.
First item.
Mayor and Council, we're going to, on item 3A, the capital improvement project presentation, this item is going to be continued to the meeting of January 24th, 2017. So we're going to start with the presentation and discussion on public safety personnel retirement system, PSPRS payment options, presentation from the Strategic Plan Committee.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I've been appointed chairman of the Strategic Plan Oversight Committee by the mayor, and there are two council members who were on that committee, Councilman Steve Shishka and Councilwoman Billy Orr. And we met over the course of 6 times. One time we met with about 12 stakeholders who we invited to a lunch meeting to bounce around ideas, hear our ideas, and give us some feedback. And I'd like to thank them very much for participating. If there are any members in the audience who were part of that stakeholder group, would you please stand? Thank you very much. Really appreciate your help. So it's my responsibility today to present a report to the entire council for your consideration. And we'll start with the council's strategic plan goals that we adopted in September and early October. We defined 4 basic goals: stabilizing the general fund, economic development, quality of life, and a service-oriented culture. Now, each one of these goals has more detail within the plan itself. But we decided as a committee that the most important and driving goal of all of these is stabilizing the general fund. So our objectives, which we set out for ourselves, and somewhat within the mayor's context, excuse me. By the way, the mayor asked me if this was a hot toddy. It's a hot toddy, less the alcohol. Our primary objective is to pay down the PSPRS liability within 10 years. Now, we use the word pay down because we want to be very honest. We would like to pay it off. We want it to be zero, no liability, but it is a bit of a moving target because it's based on actuarial numbers that we are given every year. So it's going to change somewhat every year. And we also know now that the estimated impact of the Hall and Parker decisions brings this liability to $81 million. So that was the number that we used to generate figures. And we met as a committee to put numbers to some of the options I'm going to be telling you about, so that we'd have a better understanding of the impact on our citizenry. Second objective was to provide adequate funding to implement all of the strategic plan goals. And we wanted not to be negative and punishing, but to talk about the possibilities of what could be done as we move forward as a city. If we could pay down that debt, virtually get rid of it. We talked about things like, these are examples, establishing a community policing program with more cops on the ground, more interaction with the citizenry, We talked about eliminating fire station brownouts. We don't want that to happen again. We don't want our response times to go up, and we don't want our insurance rates to go up as a result. Third, we talked about enhancing code enforcement services. In the last year, the council has passed some new ordinances which we believe will help the quality of life in Prescott, and we have codes on the books now that need to be enforced. We have one code enforcement officer, and we frequently talked about the need for enhancing that service. Mr. Lamar has given us some suggestions to work with the system that we now have budgeted, but moving forward, we will probably need more people in that job. Fourth, we want to, and we have committed to, continuing the market compensation plan for our employees. We must retain and attract high-quality people if we're going to have a good quality community. It's very important to honor our employees with good salaries, good benefits, and to keep them here. Fifth, the library has been a big topic of discussion. Suffered some cuts last year, closed on Sunday. We want to restore and expand library services. And this fits in with all of these goals identified here. Goal 3 and 4 primarily with respect to the library. Finally, we believe that improving economic development and tourism outreach is extremely important to the continued financial health of the city. Part of that is growing revenue, and in order to create revenue, you need revenue. Basic principle. I won't dwell on it too much, but we all understand that. So as we looked at a lot of options, I'm going to present to you 5 options. There were a lot of ideas bounced around. We didn't continue with some of them because some of them didn't help the general fund. But these ideas would focus on the general fund. And I will be upfront with you at the beginning and tell you that not all committee members agreed all the time, but we did, in the end, have 5 points of agreement, which I'll get to. And we went through and discussed each one of these options and vetted them very thoroughly, also with the help of our stakeholders. So the first idea was to implement a business tax with a projected annual revenue of $3.25 million. As you recall, last year the council, last year would be, enacted a business license with a minimal license fee that would cover the administrative costs. We are also authorized to establish an annual business tax, and we estimate that we have right now about 10,000 businesses. A tax would have to be based on some rational basis. The level of service, level of public safety impact was an obvious one, and we identified 3 levels of service. The highest level, or the most significant impact level, is a business that would have the most frequent calls, highest number of calls to 911. And they would pay the most taxes, but they're only 5% of our businesses. The businesses with the minimal impact are about 80% of our businesses. And that's one reason why it doesn't generate all that much money. The advantages are the City Council already has the authority by city charter to enact a business tax, and businesses needing more public safety services would pay more, which seems fair until you get to the disadvantages. Only the businesses are paying the taxes. What about the residents and the visitors? The significantly impacted businesses do include healthcare facilities, living assistant facilities, unfortunately. Does that seem fair? And then finally, the $3.25 million is way below the needed funding to achieve any of our goals. And then we heard from our stakeholders. Of course, they immediately identified what occurred to us as well, which is this kind of tax unfairly targets only business owners rather than spreading it across everyone equally. Secondly, it doesn't go to the voters. It's just a decision of the council. Third, again, only local businesses are paying down the debt rather than visitors and non-residents contributing to the solution. And fourth, in light of the business license requirement, which we passed, the creation of a business tax on top of that seemed deceptive. We didn't talk about it at the time. We knew it was out there, we knew it was a possibility, but we didn't really fully vet that one with the public. And finally, having no citizen involvement in this new tax would be a mistake. Hello. Aha. Finally, I was waiting for that one. This option was not recommended by our committee for all of the disadvantages and reasons cited by our stakeholder group. Second option, and this was an idea brought to us, and we were asked to look at it very carefully. Increase the property tax to pay the PSPRS unfunded liability. Currently, we cannot do this under the Arizona Constitution. We can increase primary property taxes 2% plus cost of new construction a year, but it's minimal. It's not going to get us anywhere near we need to go. And if you want to see an example of what, if we were allowed to do this, what the estimated property tax impact would be, look in red, if I can get my pointer to work. There we go. Our current tax rate is 0.3025, which on a house that's assessed at a value of $300,000 is equivalent to $91 a year. 0.3. If we were able to go to a 10-year, we'd have to raise the tax rate significantly. 1.9763, 5-year, 3.4465. Advantages, well, we get a little bit more money. Spreads the cost across all property owners, not just businesses. Disadvantages, not allowed by state law, constitution, or law. And again, it places the full funding of the liability on property owners and not on the visitors that utilize our city services. So once again, we heard from the stakeholders, places an undue burden on the property owners and doesn't generate funding from the non-residents who use city services. Oops. I'm going to go back to option 2. I think I'm missing a...
It's not there.
Wouldn't go on there? Oh, I see. Yeah, obviously we are not recommending this option because it's currently not allowed by the Arizona Constitution. There's a slim to none chance we could get a change in the Constitution, but who's going to vote for a property tax increase in the Constitution? Option number 3. Let's look at using the city utility rates to pay down the unfunded liability. Now remember that our current water and wastewater rates are set at a level to provide needed funding for operating and capital expenditures. We go through a long list of capital expenditure items every year. Things that we need, we know we're not going to do. We know we need to do, such as centralizing the wastewater system. We've been talking about the airport. We need some capital expenditure there, and there are a number of other things. Advantages, really only one. We have the authority already to raise utility rates. Disadvantages, a number of them. Our current rates are close to the highest in the region.
Jane, while you're there,
Yeah.
I'd just like to make a comment on that. The reason that our rates are the highest in the area because we have the most sophisticated system to get water uphill to our homes. A lot of our surrounding communities are flat. It doesn't take near the capital to get water to their homes versus what it takes to get to our homes.
Steve, it's
And
just
so
not water
that
either.
is, pardon me?
It's just not the water either. It's after we use the water.
The wastewater as
yeah.
well. Right. That's a very good point. A second disadvantage is that we estimated that it would take a 40% increase in rates in order to get adequate funding to pay down PSPRS liability. That's a very significant increase. The third disadvantage is the burden falls on the ratepayers, and again, not on the visitors who come into Prescott and who utilize our city services. Finally, the future significant capital projects are also going to require additional rate increases at some point in the future. From the stakeholders we heard, this is an option that impacts only residents and doesn't take advantage of the non-residents who visit and use our services. The voters have no opportunity to approve this rate increase, and it requires a huge percentage increase. And another good point made, it simply shifts one financial problem to another, delaying needed improvements. So again, this was an option number 3 that the committee does not recommend to the council. Going on to option number 4, this would be a dedicated sales or privilege tax, as it's technically called, which would be at a level of 3/4 of a cent for a limit of 10 years, no more, maybe sooner, dedicated to pay down the PSPRS unfunded liability. And as I explained earlier, we came up with that 3/4 of a cent by working backwards from what we know today our unfunded liability is, including Parker and Hall. There are a number of advantages. It would generate revenue that would be sufficient to pay down, possibly pay off the complete debt within 10 years. It's got a limited life. I think we can live with that much more easily if we know it's going to end in 10 years. Second, it does provide adequate funding to implement the rest of the strategic plan, all those other things we talk about, quality of life, economic development. Third, it spreads the cost over residents and visitors. People come in and shop here will be paying the additional sales tax and helping us raise that revenue. Fourth, this is at a level that keeps our overall sales tax still below the other 2 cities in the Tri-City area, Chino Valley and Prescott Valley. And finally, the estimated annual household tax burden for municipal services would be an additional $173, assuming that $23,000 of taxable spending is a typical figure spent for each household. Disadvantages, it does raise our sales tax rate over some of the Phoenix area cities. We know some people still go, and we don't know how often, but they still go to the valley to go shopping. Maybe it's fun, maybe they're combining it with other things, but if we have a higher sales tax here, it may encourage that a little more. We don't know. Another disadvantage is that if we have a freestanding special election, there will be a cost, and the cost for that election for the voters to approve a sales tax would be up to $100,000. From our stakeholders, we heard that they like the idea of non-residents and visitors, as well as residents, contributing. It would be helpful to know the percentage breakdown of spending by city residents versus spending by people outside the city versus tourists. And recently the council did approve a software program or a program by Buxton that would help us generate a lot of that data. Another comment made was that sales tax is paid on per item. High-priced items like cars and RVs could be negatively impacted, possibly driving business elsewhere. We don't know for sure, but this was something brought up by a couple of the vehicle and RV dealers at the meeting. Finally, citizens want to feel that solutions have been found for future liability before committing to an increase in sales tax. So if we go to the voters with an option like this, it would be incumbent upon the council and any information we provide to explain to the public progress that's already been made to reform the pension system. But any reforms made will not take away the debt. And that's something we have to keep in mind. We still have that debt hanging around us like an albatross that we need to deal with. Pension reform in the future will help. This is an option that the committee does favor and asks you to consider. But another variation of that option is the next one, option 5. We ask the voters to approve a dedicated sales tax and, contingent upon that approval, eliminate city property tax. This is an idea I hadn't thought of, but came out of our committee discussions. We would have the 3/4 cent sales tax for 10 years on the ballot. And with the elimination of the property tax, we would still have enough revenue sufficient to pay down the city's PSPRS unfunded liability in 10 years or sooner. That's a really important thing to remember. It would provide adequate funding to implement the rest of our strategic plan. It would spread the cost over residents and visitors. The overall sales tax would remain the lowest in the Tri-City area. And the elimination of the property tax could encourage more economic development in Prescott. When business and industry hears that there's no property tax in Prescott, they're going to take a second and third look, and they may even relocate it here, providing more jobs. Finally, the tax burden, a net tax burden with the elimination of that property tax would only be $82 a year. $82 a year. How many lattes is that? There are some disadvantages. Again, these are like the ones we talked about with just having a sales tax. Our sales tax rate would be slightly higher than some of the Phoenix area cities. We would need voter approval at an election, and if we have a standalone election, there's a cost to that. And the biggest disadvantage, I guess, is the loss of that $1.6 million that we currently get in primary property tax revenue. And I will explain a little bit more on the next slide about how that impacts us. From our stakeholders, we heard, again, this is an option that's paid for by non-residents and visitors as well as residents. They'd like to know the percentage breakdown. The high-priced items, sale of high-priced items in the city of Prescott could be negatively impacted. People might go elsewhere to buy those things. We need again to explain that solutions are being worked on and have been found for some pension reform that goes into the future, but will not take away the past debt. And most importantly, stakeholders brought to light the fact that elimination of the property tax is a good selling point for a number of reasons. For recruiting business and industry into Prescott, and the net here, the net burden on the individual is less. So that's something that we would like to highlight in any information if this goes to the voters. This is an option that the committee strongly favors for your consideration. Now this slide, I know it looks rather overwhelming. We tried to make it simple, but it's hard, you know, when you got Mr. Numbers here giving us the truth. This is a comparison of tax burdens for municipal services, including fire protection, among the city of Prescott, Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, and Dewey-Humboldt. Now look at the red here. See if I can get this. There we go. Estimated for city of Prescott, estimated annual municipal services tax burden currently is $551. Follow the bouncing red light. If we put option 4 into effect, which is the sales tax only, the burden increases to only $725. If we combine it with the elimination of the property tax, it is less, $633. Now compare that $633 with what goes on in Prescott Valley, even if they're not in a community facilities district. It's much less than half of what a Prescott Valley resident pays right now. Compare that $633 with what goes on in Chino Valley. It's less than a third of what people pay in Chino Valley, even with an increase of 0.75 cents. Dewey-Humboldt, less than half. So we thought we would tell you the major points of agreement among our committee members. As I said, we didn't always agree all the time, but here are the points that we did agree on. We want to limit a new tax to no more than 10 years. The goal would be to raise enough revenue to get rid of it sooner. And always repeal a tax or write language that makes it automatically sunset. We want to create revenue that comes from both residents and non-residents who use our city services. We need to explain how keeping the general fund stable will result in added benefits, not just cut, disaster, 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 but how can we make our city thrive and grow? How can we fulfill those strategic planning goals? We want to find a solution that most citizens will support. We most of all want whatever ballot measure is put on, we want it to pass. And we feel that the best option among all of these is a sales tax combined with elimination of the property tax. So if we were to refer, as a council, refer a ballot issue to the voters, we looked at the pros and cons of two upcoming elections. The first available election would be in May 16th of this year. The next after that would be August 29th. The deadline for notifying the county of an intention to hold an election for May would be January 16th, coming right up. But really, they'd have to have the ballot language by January 24th. And my understanding, Dana, is that that would be the absolute drop-dead date.
Yes, the county said they would allow us to submit, to let them know that we want to hold an election on, and we can tell them that on January 24th.
Okay, January 24th. We do have a deadline for filing arguments and ballot language that comes in February, mid-February for the May election, and late May for an August election. So we talked about the pros and cons of a May versus an August election. And we're not making a recommendation on either one. We want to present this information to you as a council, hear what you have to think, and then give some direction to staff to proceed one way or another. if we have a May election, the advantages are, if the voters approve, we could repeal the property tax effective this July 1st, 2017. We could also build into our budget that we're currently working on now for FY18 the additional sales tax revenue, depending on the effective date. But if we had a January 1st effective date, we'd have half a year of revenue to work with. And this would allow us to pay down that debt sooner rather than postponing it. We could also avoid budget cuts. I mean, they're undesirable from someone's point of view. The cons for a May election is obviously we have less time to spread the word, gain citizen understanding and support. And then there's the cost of holding a standalone election, city election, a special election, which is estimated to be $100,000. If we have an election in August, the pros are we have more time to gain citizen understanding and support, and the cost of the election will be combined with a regular council election, and it will be fairly minimal. Hard to say exactly, but Dana thinks maybe just $2,000 or $3,000. The cons, because of the whole cycle of things, that property tax would have to remain in effect for an additional fiscal year. We delay solving the problem of the PSPRS debt, and we're looking at more budget cuts for next fiscal year. All right, with that, I will return to the dais and turn the meeting back over to the mayor for discussions.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and show my slides up there for a minute, please. What I did was asked Mark Woodfill to lay out for me what's been happening in PSPRS for a period of time, about the last 20 years, to kind of get an indication of where we've been going. And you'll see from this chart that we've been going downhill pretty significantly. We were fully funded early on in the first part of 20 years. And then starting in about 2000, you'll see that we had a significant decrease starting in our funded ratio based on the fact that the drop program kicked in, and also the legislature provided very generous benefits to the police and fire. So I think that's something we have to be aware of. Why don't you go to the next chart? And this one kind of explains to you, even though the market's gone up significantly, they continue to go down in our funded ratio because of inadequate performance of the PSPRS. They have lost a significant amount in various downturns that we've had. I'm not certain that they've had good management. If you take a look at the rate of return that they expect on their investments, they were at 9% back in the early 2000s, and they've continually gone down. And right now, I think for 2017, they're at 7.5. In 2016, last year, they were at 7.65, and they made 0.6, and not even make 1%. So one thing that people need to understand is the increase that we're seeing this year, because I know on the fire side, I think we went from about 75% normal costs up to 91%. And one of the major problems that we have there is it recognized the fact that they had such a significant underperformance of their investments, number one. And then secondly, they also had to build in the additional costs for the Proposition 124. And even though it was explained a few minutes ago that we may feel that some of the Hall and Parker costs are indicated in this recent increase to almost $81 million, I'm not certain that's the case. We will not really know Parker and Hall until next November. And because right now the case has to go back to the lower court for determination of several factors. And until that happens, we really will not know the cost of the additional cost of Parker and Hall. Go to the last slide, and I'll give you a moment to digest that. But I think when you look at that, you'll see that even though the market has gone up significantly, our liability has gone up significantly. And I know in my discussions with the people in Phoenix last week, they indicated to me that even if the program was making its expected rate of return, we would still be underfunded. So that's one of the major problems. You know, the market is not going to pull this thing up into something that's sustainable. It's going to remain unsustainable. Even if we paid off the entire $81 million, if we had the money right now, we could pay it off. Tomorrow we'll be in debt because that's how poor the system is. And, you know, let me just say right off the bat, this is not anything against the firemen or the policemen and the fact that they are deserving of a retirement. They are. I can tell you that. What the problem is the system. And the system needs to have significant change. And so that's one reason why I'm working with the legislature right now. I had a discussion with J.D. Mesnard last Wednesday down at the Capitol building. And I can tell you that further pension reform was not on his radar. I think when I left after 30 minutes and showed him these three charts, he felt that something needed to be done. And so he has asked one of his people to drop a bill to start working on this. Right now, that bill is only going to include what we call the, what's the terminology again?
Pooling.
Pardon?
Pooling.
No. Expenditure limit. It's going to increase our expenditure limit so that, because right now, you know, whatever we decide is our expenditure limit for a year, we're not allowed to go above that by the state regulation or state law. So if we want to go above that because we need to make additional payments or would like to make additional payments, we have to have authority from the state to do that. So this bill that's being put in right now is going to give us the ability to have increase our expenditure limitation if we want to pay off PSPRS. But again, you know, we have to wait to see if it passes the legislature and gets signed by the governor. So anyway, as you can see from this last chart, I don't think the market's going to pull us out. We're going to have to make major changes to the program. In one discussion I had down there, they said really what needs to happen, because we have to understand that this entire program was developed by the legislature. The only thing we do here is determine their rate of pay as far as the job that they have to do. All the benefits and all the retirement is determined by the legislature. So the problem that we have is they've decided this and told us to pay it. And I've used this analogy before, and it's kind of like, you know, and I think, Steve, you brought this up the other day, it's like having your kid, give him a credit card, he goes out and spends, you know, as much as he wants, whenever he wants, doesn't ask you whether or not you can buy anything, but then he gives you the bill at the end of the year or at the end of the month. And that's basically what it is. So it's obvious that this one individual said what needs to happen is the state needs to come forward and figure out a state-level funding mechanism to bring this retirement system up to 100%. Then it needs to be capped and eliminated, and we go to a new retirement system that is defined contribution 50-50 of everybody putting their money into both the employer and employee, because they said right now, you know, we don't even know if 124 is going to be giving us any kind of major improvements in the future. And so I think that's something that needs to be developed. It's going to be developed in the future, whether or not 124 is really going to be a significant reform as we thought it would be. I will say also that my discussions with Noel Campbell, he's very concerned about a May initiative. Right now, he wants to try and help, I think along with the rest of our other two legislators, to try and do something more at the Capitol to try and get further reform. He feels that two things. First of all, continue to hire people under the old system, and hiring or allowing this to go to a ballot initiative before August, before the session's over, is pulling the rug out from underneath him. It's going to reduce his abilities to have any opportunity to make significant changes or have an impact on possible reform at the legislature. So I think that's something we definitely need to keep in our minds. I will say that I agree with the win-win. I think if we're going to ask the public to come forward with a 0.7 or 1.0, whatever we think we need, that's important. That we can also give them something to show them that there's some kind of something in it for them. And the fact that we would drop the property tax is definitely one way to do that. But of course, I think the best one is the one that I heard when I was down in Phoenix at the legislature, and that is, if we could do away with the old system and go to a more sustainable system, the public would be willing to step forward and provide whatever support they have to in that, even if it did end up costing them more, and the fact that there would be maybe an additional Arizona state sales tax requirement. I think communication is going to be extremely important. I will say that, I know down at the legislature they said, well, some states or some cities stratify their sales tax so that high dollar items pay a lower rate than everything else. We'll have to take a look at that. Some people I've talked to, I think that's going to be viewed very negatively. I think a lot of people are saying that it's got to be fair across the board to everybody, so we're going to have to look at that one very closely. I think there's support for a greater support for a city solution if we've gone to the legislature and we've done everything we could to try and get them to come forward to take care of this problem, because it is their problem. It's not our problem, it's their problem. They just gave it to us and we're told to pay it. And so, when I hear people say, this is our bill, we got to pay it, no, it's their bill and they gave it to us to pay. That's where it is. So I think it's important that we make every effort, and I think the people of the city of Prescott would be more willing to come forward and find a solution, whether it's whatever that amount might be, or whatever method that might be, if they know that we've done everything we could to get support or reform out of the legislature. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the council for any comments that they have. Councilman Blair.
Mark, do you have any idea what the state debt is for PSPRS?
Total statewide PSPRS, I believe it's like $7 billion for all 240
$7
cities.
billion?
Yeah. Unfunded liability. The total debt is higher than that, but that's the unfunded.
Unfunded $7 billion.
I believe so. I haven't looked it up recently.
Okay. I just sometimes wonder, Mayor, listening to your conversation, it is something that's been handed down to us by the state. I look at what the other propositions for the education with a statewide 1% sales tax, which puts all the communities on a fair playing field when it comes to buying and purchasing goods and those types of things. And looking at the fact that if our governor would understand that it is a state problem and put this on the ballot, is there a way that the people can get together to have a people's initiative to put this on the ballot, or does it have to come by the legislature?
Let me check with Noel on that, but I think there could be something probably from the citizens.
Because this is going to affect Parker Hall especially when it comes down to the police side, and it's not unveiled yet totally what that amount is. The way it's affecting the highway patrol, the county, it doesn't matter what it is, anything in public safety, that debt is never going to be paid off across the board, and every community in a state is going to suffer over it. Right. So the only way to resolve it, from my standpoint, is to see a state initiative that puts a 1% sales tax out there until the debt is paid.
All right. Councilman Lozelle.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with you, Mayor, that I'm for, I believe it was option 5, with the property tax and the cutting of the property tax. The only thing I would recommend is, along with the sunset in 10 years, it says in 10 years or if the debt is paid off earlier.
Absolutely.
I mean, if there's a knight in shining armor or something, you know, whatever happens. Also, I agree with you that I for a lot of reasons, a lot of those were mentioned, but I would go for the August election and not the May.
One thing I'll go ahead and add too is when I talked to J.D. Mesnar, the speaker, one of the things I told him is, you know, we would like to try and continue to keep the revenue sources we have right now. And because I said there's a couple of them I understand that you're looking at. If you take those away from us, it's going to put us deeper in a hole in our ability to pay this. And so he asked me what those two were, and I said, well, one was the construction sales tax, and the other one was the rental tax.
Oh.
And I think, Mark, what do we normally gain every year from the rental tax? I think you told me it was around $2 million.
Yeah, the rental tax is around $2 million.
And the construction sales tax?
I'm sorry, I don't have that number.
Well, the number you gave me in the past was about 800 to 900,000.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And it's hard to tell what the real impact would be because there's a retail increase if they change that like they're talking about, but we would definitely be going down.
Yeah. So if we lost those two sources of revenue, I don't think 0.75 would do it. We're going to be looking at 1.0 or 1.25. So, you know, I think it's very important that by allowing ourselves to get through the legislature right now, we're going to see if they're going to jerk any more of our funding streams from us. And that would have an impact on what we exactly want to put in the way of an initiative going forward and the amount that we think we're going to need based on the loss of that revenue stream. Hopefully we don't lose any, but you know, it's something that we have to continue to look at, and we should know by probably March or early April if they are going to impact us with any loss of revenue. Councilwoman Orr.
Just one quick comment to Councilman Blair's question. Melissa looked it up for me. 7.7 billion statewide is that unfunded liability.
The reason why I still bring that up is based upon the amount that a 0.6 can raise. A full 1% across the state would raise about $1 billion a year, so you would be going into a 7 or 8 year 1% raise of a state sales tax to pay off that debt instead of us trying to handle it on our own.
And we would continue to pay from the city level, so that could truncate that time as a short amount, yeah.
Mayor, first I'd like to say thank you to Steve Shiska and Jean for the work that this committee did. And I think we accomplished a lot. I'm really pleased to be here finally talking about this. When I signed on for this, I can tell you, I knew last year sitting out there in the audience when it was announced that we had this debt, that this was probably one of the most critical issues facing our city. And I think it's time for Prescott to step up and take care of this issue. You know, we complain a lot about the state, what the state does to us, and now I can tell you the state is not going to pay this debt. The legislature, I do believe, you know, we asked people to pass 124 last year. I think we got some good reform. I think more reform is coming. It needs to happen. I know the League of Cities and Towns is working on it. However, the debt belongs to Prescott. Maybe, in all due respect, Mayor, it certainly isn't our doing, but it is our debt. And last year we had to pay $5.3 million out of our general fund to pay the debt. This year we have to pay an additional $1.2 million. Next year it will be more. At what point in time do we say, let's fix this problem? I really like option 5. We went through all of them, and I want to thank staff too for all the work that they put on putting this data together. I think we've turned every stone to try to find every cent. And I just hope that we as a council can go forward and take care of this problem for our citizens. I believe they want that from us. I think they're expecting the leadership from this council, and I believe we have a solution in front of us. When it comes to timing, as you know, Mayor, I've spoken with you. You know, I wanted to go in March. I was hoping we could get something in front of us sooner and get this going in March. I understand the concern from my fellow council. And if August is a way to go and get us on board, let's go August. I can't even tell you how I do not want us to say we can't do anything until the legislature does something. And I do believe the legislature will. I know I have talked to several people about this, and I know that we'll get more reform on PSPRS. But the state is not going to pay this debt for us. And each and every year, we're going to have to come up with another $1 million. And the longer we keep kicking this can down the road, the longer it's going to take us to take care of Prescott and what we need to do.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Well, Billy, I respect your opinion a lot because I know you've been head of the largest Republican women's club in the United States. And I think you have your fingers on your tentacles out there. You know what the legislature will and won't do. One fact is that not all cities, counties, and fire districts are in the same boat as we are. At the Legal Cities meeting a couple years ago, it was pointed out Prescott is the example of the worst situation. We've since seen that the little city of Bisbee is probably in worse shape than we are. But we have very little political power in the legislature. Karen Phan will tell you that. She told us that 2 years ago when she came before the council. We are just one little city amidst a sea of bigger municipalities that have all the power in the state. Are they going to care? I doubt it. I agree with Billy. The legislature is not going to solve this problem. The sooner we get attacking on it, the better. A tax can always be repealed. Let's remember that. If the voters approve it and we don't need it, let's repeal it. There's no indication either that a majority of the legislature would agree on a single solution. They don't agree on a lot of things. And somebody might push forward an idea, but it could get shot down just as easily by another sector of the legislature. If I recall correctly, Mr. Palladini, it takes 2/3 vote of the legislature to refer a financial measure to the vote of the people.
No, it takes 2/3 vote of the legislature to change an initiative on a financial measure approved by the people.
Okay.
But the majority of the legislature and the signature of the governor can refer a ballot measure to the state.
So a solution could either come by a citizens' initiative or a referendum from the legislature.
Say that again?
There are two ways that a statewide ballot could be put on.
Right.
Citizens' initiative
Right.
or
Or a legislative referral.
referral.
Right.
Okay. Citizens' initiative is a long process. Changing the Constitution is probably a multi-year process. We can't afford to wait. The debt is mounting, the interest increases. It's like a credit card. It's increasing every day we sit here and do nothing.
Councilman Chichka.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it was to work with these two women, fellow council people. We had the conversations that you expect us to have. We argued. We talked about things that were blue sky. We came down to this, what Gene presented. You put us here to get things done, not to play kick the can down the road. And so it's imperative that we put more police visibly on the street, that we don't brown out fire stations, that we do what we're obligated to by the general fund. We're not here to save the state from PSPRS. We're here to make sure that Prescott, the general fund, is viable. And so we're not going to get involved in doing the heavy lifting for the eventual problem that Phoenix and Mesa and Gilbert and Glendale and Tucson are going to have. We need to solve Prescott's problem, and that problem is present right now. So if you think that by waiting for some knight in shining armor in the personage of the state is going to come solve our problem, I think we're not thinking correctly. We have the problem right now. Billy said, we don't solve the problem, we look at another $1.2 million out of our general fund that we have to figure out how to pay for somehow. Well, we proposed a great way to pay for it, a way that minimizes the obligation of each Prescott resident. And so I think that we really need to take a look at that. We need to vet it. We need to get citizen support. I'm a strong person for, we need to come before you guys. We need to make a compelling argument for what we've proposed. And if we can't do that, then by all means, you need to say no. But I think that we can make a compelling argument, and I think that it's imperative that we solve this issue, and we can't keep kicking that can down the road.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, we'll take some from the public. Come on down. First one gets here gets to talk. Please identify who you are and where you live, please.
Thank you. My name is Lucinda Grant, and I'm from Prescott. I would just like to say I did review this a little bit before I came over, and there was some information that was interesting in the Arizona Republic for the year 2010, where they did a series about Arizona's state pension fund. This one you're in and others, and some cities have their own pension fund, and some cities are in this one. And this one seems to be a real loser. So I think you all need to find a way to cut the leak. And so if there's some way you all can find through the state legislature, through the voters, to gut this thing, it's a serious problem. I know it is. What's happened, I've seen through the business community. In the old days, we used to have defined benefit pension plans, and we used to have defined contribution plans later. Now, what happened with the cities is they didn't get out of the defined benefit pension plans at the rate that the businesses have. A lot of businesses cut those a long time ago to cut the problems you're having. So I think you seriously need to get with the state people to try to figure out a way that you personally, as a city, can get out of the state pension fund and find your own way through other plans to do this. But to stay in the plan and keep feeding a loser like this is a disaster waiting to happen. And you're already in it. You're talking bankruptcy for the city in the paper. I say do not go bankrupt. You already have ways of solving this problem. Don't try to hurt the library over here. This is like a community resource. Please do not hurt the library for this. I think that the sales tax sounds like a good idea, but Where are you getting these numbers from? Do you really have $23,000 a year of taxable spending that you're going to apply it to per household? Where did that number come from? Is that a solid, good number for this community? I don't know. So is this a tax that we can really use? And the property taxes, that sounds like a low number for this community. I don't know if it's a true number, but I would say be careful of losing income or you're talking bankruptcy. We need to have fiscally conservative spending as a city. I see a lot of things go through here that seem to be excessive. I don't know if the finance department is adequately budgeting and maintaining some type of oversight for these expenses that come through here. It was $1.8 million for a software program a few weeks ago. They have, expensive equipment that comes through here for $250,000 one day. And I think, where is this going? Did anybody check these prices? Can we get bulk prices on buying? Do we need to check these prices first somewhere at the finance office for certain amounts over like $50,000? Are you checking? Did you get a better price? Where are you buying it from? Who's benefiting here? Can we spread the advantage out? What's going on?
You got 30 seconds left.
Thank you, sir. Fiscal conservative. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm David Turbyfill. I own DT Products down at 484 Easy Street. I am now no longer a citizen or a city resident of Prescott. I am a father of a Granite Mountain hotshot. One of the things that when the PSPRS system always comes up in the paper, there's a lot of negativity about the hotshots, and it would be really nice at some point in time that the council as a whole would help the media explain that the demise of the Granite Mountain hotshots is the burden on this situation when the state of Arizona had promised $5 million for the members that were full-time. The other thing, again, staying with the Granite Mountain hotshots, one of the things that has been sort of an issue since my facility is right adjacent to there, the city council has really taken no action in terms of disposing. They made the decision a couple of years ago, we're not going to rebuild the hotshot division, but you still have all the equipment. You've realized none of the benefit for all the work that Eric and all the guys did over the years. So there's, the hotshot buggies could have been sold, the fuels trucks, the soup truck. I mean, those vehicles are only going down in value. It is your fiduciary. I think, it may be heartbreaking to some of the community to do these things, but it's your duty, to deal with that. Secondly, or another option, or another thought is, I would still say, I agree with some people to say, quit placing so much hope on the state level for a fix. I'm not saying don't continue to work. Mr. Mayor, you've continued to cite that the legislature is the problem, and quite honestly, I don't totally disagree with you, but it doesn't seem like that your hope that they're going to solve this problem for the cities throughout the entire state that don't have the power is going to get it done. So, probably a sales tax measure or something is going to have to be done to at least be an interim step until possibly there's enough force at we start electing people that will go down there with this one focal point. The other thing, when you talk, some of you guys raised the issue about a citizens initiative. I don't know if you caught this just recently in the last within the last week, the Arizona State Legislature is making moves to limit citizens initiatives on ballot measures. So, be careful of what you wish for about those things. The citizens of Prescott have on multiple times and the council has not, the former council, the current council to some degree, has not been, when this went to ballot before, the citizens told the city of Prescott, you know, we don't believe that we're not gonna support it. We didn't pass it. The city council, no one actively, I never saw anybody actively go out there and say to the citizens why we need to do it. So if you're going to do something, you need to be, all of you need to be behind it, even if you're not as much behind it as you'd like to be, especially like yourself, Mayor. But if you're not selling it, they're not buying it. The grant that the fire department took to put 9 guys back on, I don't think really helped your effort, because the citizens of the Prescott just said, okay, we voted no, we turned the tax down, you guys said you're going to cut stuff, then you guys turn around and get a grant. We see no loss in services, so why are we going to pay? If the federal government's going to pay for us, why are we going to pay? We're not going to pay. I still would say that that's going to be your continued issue. I also feel like on an overall basis, there's a couple of things that I would like to continue on with. The real answer is that we need to grow the sales tax revenue in the city of Prescott. We need to make a reason for people to come from, it doesn't matter where they come from, the visitors. I don't care if they're coming from Chino Valley, Prescott Valley, Dewey. Look, I'm a resident now of Groom Creek, Williamson Valley, Skull Valley. A lot of these.
You got 30 seconds left.
A lot of these communities are dependent on the city of Prescott, and we spend our tax revenue there. But the events on the square, you're putting competition to all your people down there on the deal. I think you need to be looking at events that bring people to Prescott and put people in spending mode to local businesses and not spending it on cash sales that leave the town.
Okay, time's up. Appreciate it. We're sorry for your loss. Let me just say that as far as the legislature, they did give us $5 million for the hot shots. There's a possibility that they'll be looking at some more funding coming to us, maybe $3 million, based on additional people being added to the retirement system. Also, City Manager, I believe we are taking some action on some of the property that can be utilized to support the ongoing fire effort.
Yes, we are, Mayor. And in terms of some of the equipment for Station 7, we're trying to find potential buyers or places to donate the equipment. I know the Chief is working on that diligently. So.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Mayor, Council, Chris Cookneo, Vice President, Citizens Tax Committee.
Where do you live?
3850 Love Lane.
Okay.
Mayor, we share many of your opinions and efforts. Your efforts appear to be moving on the right track. And in fact, I'm preparing a presentation in February, and I think I'm going to try and steal your slides because this is probably going to save me hours of research trying to dig it up myself. The CTC right now, we have no position yet. When the city provides a solid option, we will take a side one way or the other. You know, some have said publicly that our position is for the city to declare bankruptcy, and that's absolutely false. While that is an option, it's probably one of the worst options, but it is an option that some cities have taken, been forced into even, across the country. You know, we understand that we're on the hook as a state, and CTC understands this. We've made a promise to these policemen and these firemen. We told them what their pension was going to be. We told them what they were going to get moving forward. And even more than that, it's a contractual promise. And even more than that, it's the constitutionally protected contractual promise. There's no way to just bankrupt your way out of this. And if you bankrupt your way out of it, you also bankrupt on about, I think it's $80 million in municipal loans too. You can't pick and choose what you toss away. But as for the CTC, it'd be hard for us to support any tax until the program itself is revamped at the state level. And we're not sure that they even want to tackle this problem. You guys have spoke a little bit about this already. At this time, the unfunded liability is a moving target. We're not sure you can fix this problem. Just this year, we jumped from $74 million to $81 million just from one single lawsuit. Will the fund make its projected returns? They didn't this year. Will the lack of the fund to make projections add to our unfunded liability? You think about this, we're being asked to make a payment on a debt. So you're going to make a payment on this $74 million house. Well, next year, I tell you what, it's at $81 million. The following year, maybe it's at $79. The following year, it's at $92. Is that a mortgage you'd be willing to take over? It's got to make sense to the people. If we're going to pay this off, we need to know it's going to go down. We need to know it's going to go away. In our minds right now, there's more questions than answers. We currently have a team doing research just to grasp how we got into this predicament in the first place. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think we need to just grasp the facts, and everyone needs to buy in on these facts. Just the other day, I was filling up my car, and was talking with a firefighter, and he said, this is because the city didn't pay its bills. The state kept giving the city bills, and they wouldn't pay it. Well, I talked with Mark again. He said, that's absolutely not true. We've made every payment that we've been asked from the fund to make. But you know what? They truly believe it's because we didn't pay the bills. We need to get a firm grasp of the facts that are out there before we can even move ahead, and everyone needs to agree, okay, yeah, this is what happened, and maybe these are the changes we can make. We'll report our findings at a presentation February 21st from 6 to 8 at Alta Vista, but interest is going so fast we may need to change the venue to accommodate the crowd. We invite all of you to join us at that. Hopefully you'll get to see some of your own slides, Mayor. That'd be great. But right now, the CTC has no position. Thank you for asking us to participate in the forum. But we do think that the state needs to solve the big picture problem before we even consider taxation. We need to close the gaping wound first, then we can start fiscal rehab. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just go ahead and say, based on some of the conversation of the last person here, I did talk to Noel Campbell and some other folks down in Phoenix, and they said that, Arizona is one of the few states that decide to enshrine the pension system in their constitution. The vast majority of states don't do that. They only treat it as a standard contract. So there's some thought of possibly putting dropping a bill this year to actually try and do away with pulling it out, removing the pension clause from the Constitution. But I've also been told that there's enough case law just for regular contracts that even if we were able to do that and reduce it down to just being considered like normal contract law, there's enough legal precedence that we're probably not going to see much movement in trying to be able to take care of any reform to the system that's going to be meaningful. So I just want to let you know that that has been considered to some extent down there. But again, yeah, either one, going for the removing the pension clause or possibly trying to get them to come up with some funding source, both of them are going to be pushing a rock uphill. I can tell you that. Go ahead.
My name is Daniel Matson. I live over on Merritt Street. Well, first off, to build on Chris's analogy of closing the gaping wound, we better try to staunch the bleeding while we wait for it to get closed. We have our ship of state, or in this case, ship of city, is leaking water badly. We're going to sink at the rate things are going. We have to do something. If the state's going to do it and does it several years down the road, how much does the city lose out on? I mean, we're going to be paying through the nose and the interest is going to be eating us up. Not only are we paying on a credit card, but we're paying only the minimum payments. And we all know what that does. We need to start paying this down. I would much, much rather we start paying it down and then say, hallelujah, the state has solved the problem, than to say we're waiting for the state to solve the problem as we lose the library, fire stations, police, insurance rates go up. It's going to cost the citizens less money to go ahead and bite the bullet now. One thing I am concerned about, that either if we eliminate the property tax, okay, right now we could theoretically increase by 2% per year on this 0.3%. If we go to 0%, doesn't that mean that we never get to increase property tax? I'm not so sure we should jump into that until there's a very good explanation on that one for those people who are concerned. Because, you know, if you're going with a $100,000 house, you're talking $30 a year. Actually, I'm trying to make an offer on a property, so I would be one of those taxpayers. I'm not concerned with $30 a year more than I am concerned for the city keeping that $1.6 million. If you have a $300,000 house, I don't think you're really all that worried about $91 a year. You know, I just don't think that's a big concern. But if we put ourselves in a position where we have zero property tax and no way to bring the property tax up again, that's a concern. You either need to explain why that's not a problem, or let's go with option 4. I think we do need to do a sales tax. That's by far the best way. I was at one of their meetings, and you know, we kind of saw this train coming down the tracks many years ago. I know that when we did when we started the general plan update meeting, we knew that this was around. We just didn't know how bad the problem was yet. Finally, PSPRS let us know what they say our unfunded liability is, and we're like, we've paid the bill every year. It's their fault, not our fault, but here we are. I've got a cut. It doesn't matter who caused the cut. I better stop the bleeding. My boat is leaking water. I better get out the bucket and start bailing. If we wait for the legislature, I mean, there's probably a room for quite a joke to sit here and say, how long does it take the legislature to fix a problem? We can't afford to wait. We need to put this in. I can understand waiting till August instead of putting it in May. I would have loved to have had it be this past August. But we need to do this. We need to do this sooner than later, and we need to really present a unified front, if you will, to the citizens of Prescott and explain why this is so important that we pass this and not cut off our nose to spite our faces. And bankruptcy would be an absolute disaster the city of Prescott would no longer be anything like what it is today if we went the bankruptcy route, and that probably wouldn't solve our problem anyway. So I think we should seriously consider option 4, unless you can give an awfully good reason why my concern about losing the property tax and not being able to bring it back up. If you can explain to me why that can be undone, then maybe I can go with option 5. But right now, I think option 4 is a good one.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hello, Council and our Mayor and Council. My name is Ralph Hess. I live here in Prescott. A couple things I wanted to bring up. One, initially, with regard to the goals of the strategic plan, the thought came to me that it might be beneficial for the community to first look at what is important for the community with regard to quality of life. What are the factors that are important to us before we start looking at each of these individual points? But with regard to the public safety personnel retirement system, I'm concerned once again about the never-ending loop of looking at sales tax as the only means of gaining revenue to address city services. I know that's what's left to us because of what the state legislature, the Constitution, and the Arizona statutes limit us to sales tax. That's why we keep looking to sources that bring visitors into town so that they'll spend sales tax, and it's a never-ending loop. In the comparison that was part of the program regarding the tax burden on the various communities, if you look at all of our neighboring communities, even though they're paying more of a tax burden, all of them are paying a much more significant property tax. 2.7538 for Prescott Valley, 3.6306 for the property tax for Chino Valley. I don't know what it is that locked us into a 0.3025 property tax, but I know we're topped out at that. And frankly, our hands are tied to sales tax. My concern with option 5 is that once you get rid of that tax, the idea that, let me back up. I've been here on a number of times for a number of years, hearing the lament from City Council every time there's a dip in the economy, is that we don't have the necessary revenues because of the loss of sales tax. And everyone knows we need alternate sources of revenue and can't be dependent on sales tax. That's what I hear over and over and over again. And option 5 is going to eliminate the meager property tax, relatively speaking, the relatively meager property tax that we have available. And the same reason, I would suspect, the same rationale for not going with option 2, which is you're never going to get voters to be to change the Constitution or the state statutes in order to increase the options and opportunity to get additional sales tax, is the same rationale that's going to say if you ever need something other than sales tax in the future and the only option you have is property tax and you're going to go back to the taxpayers, you're not going to get it. Because it's the same rationale. If they're not going to vote for a constitutional change and they're not going to vote for a state statute change now, why would they vote for it later? So that's one concern. The other one is, and I made this comment before, is sales tax is disproportionately burdensome on those who are living in poverty. And I don't know how many of your stakeholders' comments came from people living in poverty, but I doubt that there are those who are looking at an increase in $82 possibly of a tax burden who are living in poverty are looking at as to whether they're going to give up lattes. I think what they're going to be or possibly be looking at is, am I going to be able to pay for my the highest water and wastewater treatment bill in the area, or am I going to put food on the table? And so I think we have to start looking at other revenue sources, which takes me to what Councilman Blair had suggested is, how do you get around the legislature? The legislature continually takes away local government revenues. Even now, the one where they tell you that they're providing shared revenues, they now have provisions in that statute that say, if you pass a law, an ordinance, within the city that the Attorney General for the state believes violates state law, they're going to withhold your shared revenues. It doesn't go to a judge unless the Attorney General thinks, well, it might or might not violate the law. But basically, if the Attorney General says it violates the law and he's convinced of it, or she in the future is convinced of it, they can withhold your shared revenues. So we can sit back here and say, yeah, we're stuck with what the legislature tells us we have to take, or we can look to initiatives. You've got the League of Arizona Cities and Towns. They should be able to provide some leverage, more than just the city of Prescott, to say, look, what are the other revenues that are available? Okay, maybe we can't get people to vote for a constitutional amendment or to at least have the opportunity to consider additional property tax, but there's no constitutional provision that prevents local governments from presenting to voters the opportunity to decide whether to have a progressive income tax and a local income tax. The only thing that precludes the cities from doing that is that same shared revenue provision. So
you got 30 seconds.
Right. So if they continue to threaten to withhold shared revenues, I'd suggest we look at something that is fairer for the community, a progressive income tax, for instance, or other ideas. That's just one. And look to the League of Arizona Cities and Towns and other sources to begin looking at initiatives to begin to take some of the power that the state legislature is trying to take from local governments.
Thank you. Next.
Mayor and Council, Charlie Arnold, Prescott, Arizona. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to hear from the public today. Thank you to the Strategic Plan Committee for reaching out and asking for stakeholders to come to the table. I look at this in so many different ways, and it's easy to go off in 20 different tangents, but the facts are simple. Our debt related to PSPRS is growing exponentially every single year. Every year that we wait, it's only growing more. And there's a viable option on the table. Option 4 and 5, they both make sense. The real question isn't should we pursue it, it's when should we go forward as a community to the voters. And unlike in the past, where we haven't had a unanimous vote or position from the city, we need to get there. Whatever that is, this council needs to come together and say, here is what we need to do for Prescott. And there's a whole lot of people who are interested in getting behind that and going out and helping educate the public. It's so easy to poke holes in things that truly do not matter to the problem. We have an opportunity this year to gauge what the state's temperature is on reform to PSPRS. I think there's some advantage to understanding where they may be willing to go. At the same time, we have missed the opportunity for the last year to already be paying this down. And so my position on it has been that this council needs to pick a number, pick a date, and put this forward to the voters and incorporate the community. We will be there to help support you guys, go out, educate the public, and really focus on what matters. Every day that we wait, this is only going to grind more, become bigger, and become something that won't help Prescott's future, but will sink it. If we want to go grow our tax base, that's fantastic, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. So let's make that one of our goals to achieve during the period where we're taking this weight, these anchors that are dragging us backwards away. If the state is indicating a willingness to work, to find true reform, to make sure that this system has some future, whatever that looks like, it's going to take years. Let's find out if they're interested in truly doing it so that when we go to the voters, we can say, this is where the state's heading. This is where this council wants to head, the council elected by the people, and ultimately we will follow behind that. So again, the question you all have is the amount and when. And I think it needs to happen. And if it's 0.75, it's 0.75. Thank you.
Thank you. And Charlie, we'll appreciate any effort you can give us in the future to help convince the local citizenry that, you know, we've got a viable plan here and we'd like to move forward with it. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi.
My name is Cecilia Jernigan, and I live here in Prescott. My husband and I have been here for 20 years. Just absolutely love the charm of downtown Prescott. I drove around this morning early, and I looked at our community, and I thought to myself, what's happened the last 20 years? And I think that we have an opportunity right now, today, to make a difference going forward. I was the chairman in 2015 for the Prescott Good Governance Committee. 2016, Peter Pearson has been our chairman. We met last night and we talked about the issues. We talked about what you're talking about today. I'm here to tell you that we are behind you. We're behind you, Mayor and Council and City Manager. We want to bring that charm back to Prescott the way it was 20 years ago. But we need to get the people behind us and behind you. Social media is amazing in this region. I help several small businesses with their marketing, advertising, and social media. With one click, I can reach 10,000 residents in Prescott. So I urge you to move forward. I urge you to vote on either number 4 or number 5 today. We need to move quickly, and we need to do it with some sophistication, with digital marketing, because you can reach the people, and they're going to be behind you on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. Mary Beth Wren, Prescott, Arizona. Gene, I'm really happy that you talked about being honest with the taxpayers, because I think that's really, as elected officials, you all really need to be honest with the taxpayers. My biggest concern is when you talk about solving the debt, that having a tax increase is not even going to come near solving the debt or solving this PSPRS problem. Having a tax increase does not even come close to this. It doesn't fix anything. We are just throwing money at a problem that the citizens and the residents of Prescott did not create. The legislature created this problem. They get our contributions every 2 weeks. They invest it, they lose it, and then we just get the bill. First of all, and you're saying that it's only a couple entities. 201 entities out of these 237 entities are not fully funded. And out of that, the vast majority of those 201 entities, they aren't even coming close to being healthy. This is a statewide massive problem. So it's not going to be, they're going to ignore us. They can't. Because this, to me, it's a financial bomb that's coming upon this state. And until then, you are just throwing money at a problem that's flushing it just down the toilet. We can't fix this by having a sales tax on this. What I'm concerned about, once you initiate a sales tax for PSPRS, we're going to have, it's a problem called tax avoidance, that the increase is just going to drive businesses away. And that when you hope to increase the revenue, you're actually going to decrease it. That your small businesses are actually going to lose money, and that's my biggest fear. But the last thing I want to bring up, and the mayor alluded to it, is the 0.6 return. And I just want to listen to the gravity of this. The board down in Phoenix expects that we're supposed to make this return. We only made 0.6 last year. We have a shortfall to make up from that. And so we expect to make a certain percentage next year. Because of that shortfall, we have to make up in the neighborhood of 15% next year, including the interest. So we made 0.6 last year. The year before that, we only made 3.68 on these pension funds. So let's be honest with the taxpayers of Prescott. This risk involved that we're going to make all these returns, that 0.75 is never going to make it. We're just falling behind that it has to be a statewide solution. So this fixing this with the sales tax increase just isn't being truthful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. I'm John Stevens, live and work in Prescott. I spent yesterday with Noel Campbell and David Stringer and this fella, Leonard Gilroy. Some of you know him from Reason Foundation. I think there is some level of willingness and interest at the state level to work at fundamental solutions. Not tomorrow, not real soon. I'm pretty sure that this city council is going to come forward with a sales tax proposal. Pretty sure. I would say to you that you increase the chances of citizens' approval if at the same time the city council can point to actions by the city to reduce spending where you can, whether that's privatize some functions. Certainly an easy one, an obvious one, I think, is no new enrollees in the old system. Are we 45 days away or 60 days away from the new system?
1 July.
1 July. To bring any new participants, city employees, public safety employees, at this close date to the old expensive system doesn't make a lot of sense. The new system is better for the city, probably in many ways better for the employees. And I apologize for this, it's my asthma. So I say be able to point to both. We need more money, and one way to get it, one way is taxes, another way is don't spend it elsewhere. And if you can point to both honestly, you're going to increase the chances of citizen approval, which you do need in the end. And then when you're interested or when you want to, I'd be happy to share with you the time I spent yesterday in Phoenix at the state legislature with a lot of the players. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next.
My name is Phil Good. I'm a resident of Prescott. Councilman, not that I'm advocating this tax at all, but I haven't heard any discussion about bonding. Right now you're dealing with a variable debt. And Stanford University has studied public pension debt pretty extensively. And their recommendation is a legitimate expectation of return to be somewhere around 5%. So we're dealing with a 7.5% expected return here. And as a rule of thumb, for about every 0.25% reduction in that rate of return, you're going to add about 10% to your debt. So if we brought this 7.5 down to about 5, you're really talking about doubling your liability. So you're not dealing with an $85 or an $81 million debt. You're talking about $160 or $170 million debt. So just like financing your home mortgage on a variable mortgage, if you could sell some general obligation bonds, and YRMC just funded about $50 million plus in bonds at about 3.7% fixed, then you could pay off this debt on a bond with a fixed interest rate and save a substantial amount of money down the road over the course of this 10 years. So again, I'm not advocating that tax, but rather than having a tax that is paid in increments over that 10 years, being able to float a low interest rate bond, pay your principal off, and then deal with a smaller interest rate to the bondholders would be a significant savings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Phil, we have discussed that, just not during this meeting, but I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
So what you're saying is you think there's additional options, Greg?
Yeah, I don't think that there's, we'd have to look at Mark and what that, I mean, we've discussed bonds and as we go forward, I think maybe we should look to see what the pros and cons of that are.
Okay. But I assume, and maybe Phil, you can help me with this, if we do have a bond, we still have to pay off the bond. And it's not going to be something that we can do from our current funding. So it seems to me that we would probably still have to have some source of income.
Right, you'd have an additional revenue stream to pay off those bonds, but at a much lower interest rate, and you wouldn't have the compounding issues that you'd have with this variable rate.
Okay, thank you. Next, please.
Kathleen Murphy. I live at 201 Vista Drive. I'm a 50-year resident of Prescott, Arizona.
Can you speak into the mic a little bit more, please?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that better?
Yes,
and
a lot better.
In full disclosure, I have a son who is a captain in the fire department and a son-in-law who works for the city. Consequently, I think I want to say thank you for finally doing something about this. I'm very much in favor of the dedicated sales tax. I would like to recommend that you not get rid of the property tax. I own a home here, and I own a second home that's a rental, and I think that I have more responsibility to pay tax on because more of those services come to me because I own land. And I also think that considering the loss of money that we've had in losing many of our well-trained firemen and policemen. Sometimes people don't realize how much money we lost in losing. I don't know how many we lost, like 10 or 12 in a 2-year period. It's a huge amount of money to retrain those people. So sometimes we forget that there's other expenses, and somebody brought up the library. So I would recommend that we go for option 4, and also because of what the gentleman said, that there is more. I cannot believe how low my property taxes are. I have a son who lives in Boise, Idaho, which is a conservative area, and his taxes are significantly lower. I don't think my taxes are too high. I wish they could be a little higher so that we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. Having said all that, I'd also like to offer My background is in marketing, and I would be happy to volunteer my time to help with this process because I think it's so important. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Kathleen.
So, ma'am, I guess what you're saying is that if we could get some legislative action that would allow us to slightly increase our property tax, city property tax, to pay PSPRS, that would be in addition to whatever else, what other revenue source we have. So we might have a multiple option rather than just doing a single option. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and I do also think we ought to be using we have the ability to increase our property taxes by 2% a year, is that correct? Or something like that? My taxes on my house have gone down several years in the last 7 or 8 years, and I never can figure out why we're doing that. To me, it's like you're losing money to save a few dollars. You're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that would be my recommendation. Yes, I do agree with you.
Okay,
Mayor.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
As a point of discussion, bring up what Phil's saying and Kathleen there. You know, as a body, we decide maybe option 4 is more viable, so we do have that sustained 1.6 or 8, whatever that was, but we could save more of that through the percentage in the bond. It would be advantageous later on. You know, 1.8 would be pennies if what Phil's saying, that we'd be paying 20 more million through interest, paying directly to the state. So you know, something to consider.
Yeah, and when we looked at the one option that was going to be utilizing an increase in the city sales tax or the city property tax, we were looking at it being the only funding source. But it probably does make some sense to look at that being, you know, maybe a part of another or a combination of another option to get us where we need to be. So I think that's something we still need to look at. Yeah.
Excuse me, Mayor, could I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
Mark, what are our abilities to bond right now?
The city does have a good credit rating. We're still AA. We do have some capacity in our MPC debt. Obviously, as the mayor pointed out, if you bond, you have to pay that debt back. So you still need a revenue source.
And you need a dedicated revenue source.
Yeah, that's helpful. A tax can be considered a dedicated revenue source or a pledgeable revenue source. And you know, the comments that were made by Mr. Good are important as we look forward. I would not, you know, that's something that needs to be evaluated as we proceed. Obviously, right now, to exchange a fund that's earning 0.6, which has been pointed out, for a fixed rate of 5%, does the opposite to you. You end up paying more because this isn't a mortgage. You can't, it's not a fixed rate of 7.5. 7.5 is what's used to come to the actuarial valuation. But until PSPRS starts earning 7.5 or something over what you can borrow for, you're not going to want to exchange this liability for a fixed rate where, yes, you're paying 5% every year and you gave that money to PSPRS, so they're earning 0.6, and now you're paying 4.4% more every year because you bonded it. But that doesn't mean that 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, as the economy changes and things change, that is a way that we would want to continue to look at as a city as we move forward, as a potential to help reduce the amount that we pay overall.
So if in fact we voted to, and the citizens voted to use a sales tax to help pay our PSPRS debt, would it be possible, and how quick is it possible to be able to all of a sudden, if there were options presented by the state that were viable options to help us pay off that debt sooner, how quickly could we say, okay, then let's do that and let's sunset our sales tax?
Well, again, I think the intent that I'm hearing from council is if we're able to pay this off quicker through using debt or through using a state revolving loan fund, the tax would sunset when the liability is paid down to zero, the unfunded liability. So, all those things can help reduce that 10-year period that the committee has brought forward.
And Mayor and Council, remember, the charter requires a voter approval to increase the TPT. There's no sort of corollary to reduce the TPT. So the council could vote to repeal a voter-approved increase of 0.75% really at any time. In other words, the discussion today was a 10-year automatic sunset, but if the problem were solved in 7 years or 3 years or 5 years, council can always go and repeal that effective basically 30 days. So just keep that in mind. So if a GO bond were adopted or approved, that sort of solved the problem, then sooner than the 10 years, the council could always repeal that without having to go back to the voters.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Harry. Number one, I want to thank my fellow council for working on this and bringing forward your recommendations. You did exactly what you were asked to do. You worked diligently and came up with some deals. I do agree with Councilman Lozelle, and the mayor alluded to it. There's never just 3 or 4 or 5 options. There's always another one out there somewhere. And one of the reasons why we have workshops and study sessions, interface with the public, is to give thought process to help drive us to where we need to go. And I appreciate this opportunity for public dialogue. I appreciate the people out in the audience that have come forward and given testimony and some pretty viable thought processes. And we did talk about potential bonding capability. We did talk about various different things early on in the conversation with regards to addressing this. I do agree that we need to look at this sooner than later. I, however, think it's premature to think March. I do think we need to hear from the state with regards to what's on their mind. I mean, they're supposed to have some resolution coming forward sometime, from what I understand, in late March. And I think it would be counterproductive to Noel Campbell's efforts on our behalf if we don't pay attention to some of what he's trying to tell us. Keep your powder dry. So I think we're making progress.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the public?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Sanford Cohen, live at Fitzmaurice Drive in Prescott, and also own 2 commercial properties in Prescott. First of all, I want to thank Council members Wilcox, Sischka, and Orr for inviting me to be a part of the strategic planning dialogue. I thought that hearing from my fellow business people as to the possible impact of a sales tax was very enlightening, especially with regard to the big ticket items. I think that really does give us a cause for concern if by the point of diminishing returns, by raising the tax rate, if we're able to render those vehicle dealers non-competitive, that could end up being a net negative for the revenue picture for the city. So that is something to be concerned about. I don't know if the laws allow for a cap on to whom the tax would apply, whether or not it would have a deleterious effect on large item sales. They seem to think so, and I see the case for that. In our strategic planning meeting, I quoted a situation that I was personally familiar with in La Paz County, where they had gotten into a legal dispute over a landfill contract that the county decided to sue and lost the lawsuit, and was so bitter over the loss that they decided not to even worry about the judgment. Well, this sat for 8 years until a new board of supervisors finally was seated and said, we've got to deal with this problem. We didn't create it. We feel it's unfair, but we've got to deal with it. and they had to raise their sales tax to 12.5%. And the two car dealers in Parker saw a number of their sales trickle up to Mojave County and Lake Havasu, where the sales tax was more than 3% less. So there are real case economic decisions that people make when situations change. I can tell you right now that there's a number of small business people here that are dealing with the impact of the new minimum wage law. And that, here you're thinking that you're bettering the life of people on the lower income level, but now they're going out into the marketplace and find they're going to have to pay more for their goods and services. So the net to them is actually nothing. But it does make things more difficult. One of the items that I brought up at the strategic planning meeting towards the end was I said, what is the bonding capacity of the city of Prescott? Because we hadn't really talked about bonding until I brought it up. And I do feel that maybe some sort of shared sacrifice might be in order, that if there is a way to preserve the property tax revenue stream. I mean, if we're hurting for money, then taking money away that we're already getting willingly from the population does seem kind of counterintuitive. But then maybe mitigate that sales tax with some bonding. And that way you're kind of splitting the baby in half. Again, we already went to the voters on this issue. They already turned it down. So it's kind of like if you're going to take a second bite out of that apple, we're going to have to come up with something, I think, that is going to be more palatable. And with all due respect to the person that said that social media is the be-all and end-all of communication between people and marketeers, I can tell you that it is probably the biggest source of fake news and propaganda that has ever been created in the history of mankind. So I think unfiltered, direct to the public, locally produced media is probably a far better way in which to give a factual presentation on your problem. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, and after you get done, I think we better wrap this up. I say we already got people coming in for the 3 o'clock, and I think we'll ask the committee to do a little further work on this.
Thank you, Mayor. Sanford is the incoming chairman of the board for the Chamber of Commerce. I would appreciate you folks taking a look at the potential of going to the public and asking for redistribution, maybe not increase, but as we live, breathe, and speak today, we already collect 2-cent sales tax, and maybe there's a different way to spend the 2 cents rather than just ask for more all the time. And maybe there's, here again, as Craig was saying, maybe there's another option on the table besides just give me more. Maybe should we be spending what we get differently than what we're doing? So,
well, I do want to say, Councilman Lamerson, that with the new president and CEO of our chamber, comes a renewed level of optimism and energy that we think will be quite contagious here in the city. I think some of the moves that the city has made with regard to planning for economic development and tourism are going to be quite bullish for our economy. So whoever it was that said that maybe a little extra growth and a little extra money in the till might help things, I'd say that the elements are in place for something like that to take place.
Thank you.
Mayor, I know we're kind of running out of time, if I could just throw a couple of things out so that the committee sort of doesn't spin its wheels and it proceeds forward.
Okay,
there are a couple of comments. Yeah. First of all, just three points, and I'll touch on two briefly, and then one I'll let you know. Local income tax is precluded by state law, and Mr. Hess is right. If the city were to attempt to adopt a local income tax, we may be able to. First of all, we would likely lose a lawsuit. Second of all, we would likely lose our state shared revenue. So, what little local income tax we would be able to collect, notwithstanding the whole collection cost of income tax, I don't think that's feasible. The second is that there was a suggestion, I believe, that Prescott simply opt out of the PSPRS system on its own. That is not viable. We're mandated to basically be in the PSPRS system. State law says we have to have a police and fire pension system. And then it goes on to say that after 1968, that pension system is the PSPRS system. So we're mandated to have a police and fire pension system, and then after 1968, all police and fire employees are in this PSPRS system. So it's effectively a mandated system for the city. And the third issue that came up was bankruptcy. It's a long, involved discussion. We have brought it up to the council before, but you know, we've looked at it. It's really not a viable option. And in the future, I think as we go forward, if the council wants to hear sort of a more detailed discussion about municipal bankruptcy, happy to present it. But it is a extremely expensive, probably not viable, and the city doesn't really even qualify for it under this sort of insolvency requirement. So I just want to throw that out there so that when the committee sort of proceeds forward on its additional work, that we can kind of focus on the things that are sort of real and viable and not these sort of peripheral things.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, this is a very complicated subject, a lot of moving parts to it. I want to thank the committee that has worked on bringing this forward, and the staff that has done a lot to support the committee and trying to come to some resolution on this. I still think we need to take into consideration some of the comments made by the public. I think there's some other options out there, and there might even be some combination of options that would work. So what I'd like to do is ask the committee to go back and take one more look at what was said today and see if there's any other options or combinations of options that you think would possibly come forward and be considered by the council as a whole. So if there's no other questions or comments, very quickly, we're going to adjourn and probably meet about 10 minutes after. That'll give everybody a chance to kind of recoup and get our other paperwork that we have to bring in here. So thank you for coming today, and hope you stick around for the voting session. That'll start in 15 minutes. Thank you.